Hello, my name is Enrique Mallen. The title of my presentation is Pablo Picasso, Art at the Periphery. One of the most recognizable self-portraits by Picasso was painted early in 1901 for his first Paris exhibition at Galerie Vollard. The painter is shown merged, as it were, with his broad palette at the left, and both of his hands are obscured. The dots of reds, yellows, and a touch of white that appear on the palette reflect the colors that he used in other parts of the composition, especially for the face and the cravat that he wears. Such color equivalents imply identity between artist and medium. The binary scheme of the bright figure against the cobalt background founds the basic paradigm of visual presence. In line with the emphatic yo inscribed on its surface, the picture confirmed artistic performance as an act of creation. After the successful Vollard exhibition, Picasso painted a second self-portrait, which in its brash self-confidence, bold coloring, and brushwork, presents a ghostly apparition emerging from the darkness. It was painted to capture the more introspective artist that Picasso seems to have been striving to become. Intense and haunting, the work bears comparison with other psychologically charged self-portraits of the period, such as those of Edvard Munch. As Barnardo has suggested, it can be seen as an expression of Picasso's likely interest in the occult art and spiritualism that was widespread at this time. The painting's hallucinatory effect and Picasso's trance-like stare are hardly suggestive of this. The work confirms Picasso's self-identification as both a visionary and a sort of shaman able to conjure an image from thin air. Another early depiction that could easily be read as a self-portrait shows a character sitting in a cafe interior. These scenes of drinkers at Parisian cafes were a frequent subject for artists in the later 19th century, which may have prompted Picasso to set his own version apart by casting the drinker as a harlequin instead. This character had been a common feature of popular entertainment in France. His famed mercurial, crafty nature attracted Picasso. His trademark was the diamond-patterned costume. Like him, a patchwork of different guises. Picasso extended his multiple personality by giving his harlequin a white powdered face, ruffled collar and cuffs, and a black skull cap, attributes normally associated with Pierrot. The painting invites speculation as to the possible symbolic meaning that might be generated by this hybrid harlequin Pierrot seated alone at a cafe with oversized floral decoration above his head, as if he were an emanation of the mind. The cryptic two-figured hand gesture pointing upwards, which we will encounter again in a later work, offers the viewer an additional secret sign language to decode. The contours have been simplified and abstracted, but drawn so firmly that the design of the picture locks together like a jigsaw puzzle, with the very heavy, flat application of the paint further emphasizing the unity of the surface. These are the characteristics of Paul Gauguin's later style. He had gained a reputation as a heroic outsider at odds with established values, forced to the life of a savage in the South Seas. In a later self-portrait, Picasso dramatically simplified his likeness in order to focus on his own face, presenting himself as a young bohemian with a haunting gaze. The body is painted as an essentially flat plane, except for a few outlining strokes to define the contour of his jacket. The absence of volume in the figure continue into the flat space around him, which is painted with a similar monochrome tone. The use of blue for all aspects of this composition contributes to the intensity of this new self-image. This self-portrait is actually one of the first works in which the artist began to explore the full potential of the blue monochrome. Applying this new style to his own image, the artist gave the canvas the quality of a manifesto and affirmed a new image of himself. As he admitted, it was while thinking of the death of Casagemas that I began painting in blue. In these words spoken to Pierre Dex, Picasso revealed how a sudden and profound change in his art had been triggered by a dramatic event in his own life. His friend's suicide impelled him to explore the traditional theme of death and lamentation, giving rise to what has become known as the Blue Period. This dependency between art and life established a pattern that was to remain with him for the rest of his career. Picasso conveys the sense of bereavement through the choice of a general monochromatic palette, and by excluding almost all narrative details. The dominance of the color blue, which contrasts with the yellowish white of the skin, serves symbolically to evoke the coldness and silence of death. Here, loose brushstrokes are applied as if the artist were modeling the dead man's face and shroud with his own paint. By envisaging another friend, Jaume Sabartés, in the likeness of the suicidal Carlos Casagemas, Picasso, declaring his belief that painting was a magic act, resurrects the dead in the guise of the living. To emphasize the religious aspect of the painting, Picasso left a trail of allusions to El Greco, who favored such subjects. The figure's slender, tapering fingers and bizarrely stretched out limbs, the morbid color scheme of blues, whites, and creams all point to him. Replacing the usual skull, crucifix, or sacred chalice with a huge tankard of beer, the canvas adds an ironic tone and serves to highlight the nihilistic message. According to Sabartés, Picasso believes that art emanates primarily from sadness. In 1903, Picasso painted one of the most significant works of the period, and one of the few paintings that he actually titled himself. It was La Vie, Life. Unifying the composition is a pervasive sense of mystery, of strange rituals and unfathomable secrets. On the most obvious level, it represents the ages of man, the journey from birth, embodied in the mother with her infant child, to procreative maturity in the young couple, and finally to old age in the crouching figure who seems bent under the weight of years. But within this obvious narrative lurk more perplexing subtexts. The peculiar pose of the male figure, an idealized portrait of Casagemas, seems fraught with inscrutable significance. He points with his left hand in a rhetorical gesture that conveys an arcane knowledge, perhaps the secret of the dead that must remain forever just beyond our grasp. We know from preliminary drawings that Picasso had originally conceived the figure as a self-portrait in the traditional pose of the occult Hermes Trismegistus, a combination of the Greek god Hermes and the Egyptian god Thoth. With his right hand pointing upward and his left one down, Hermes embodies in his pose the mystical formula as above, so below. In other words, life and death move in harmony, impelled by the same deep forces, so that one can read one by the light of the other. Or to put it another way, that our existence is irrevocably linked with our demise and vice versa. As he continued to work on the canvas, he replaced his own face with Carlos Casagemas' face, thus bringing his dead friend back to la vie, to life. The true purpose of his art becomes clear in a self-portrait from 1906. Picasso outlined his face and body with the simplicity of a medieval icon, but these graphic elements coexist uneasily with passages of subtle shading, specifically in the sleeve of his right arm and the left side of his torso, that draw on a different perceptual mode. The tricks of the trade, by which a painter suggests a three-dimensional form on a two-dimensional surface, are all present, but deployed in such a way as to undercut any consistent reading. The dark shadow beneath his chin, for example, suggests a projection into space that is belied by the flat treatment of his neck and much of the body below. As Unger points out, nowhere is this perceptual play more evident than in the way Picasso has depicted the thumb of his left hand. Wedged through the hole of the palette, the thumb is logically speaking the element that should project furthest into our space. But Picasso has rendered it as merely as much of lighter paint. The artist was pushing his painting in two conflicting directions, stressing an iconic flatness while at the same time maximizing sculptural solidity. He was seeking a way of restoring a lost sense of wholeness, to wrest painting from the tricksters, the frauds, and the purveyors of cheap effects, who produced nothing but empty tours de force, he would say. In Picasso's hands, painting must be an act of creation, not a sham intended to fool spectators. Worth notes that here the artist does not even need a brush, it seems. His body is his instrument. With his broad body, erratic, inert, fragmented, insubstantial, and deformed, is as equivocal a construction. His face is a mask. In many African tribes, masks symbolize unseen supernatural forces. The wearer conceptually surrenders his human body when wearing the mask, transforming himself into a conduit. Masks make it possible to activate ancient archetypes, with the mask wearer reanimating or personifying an ancestral presence or spirit, a deity or power from the beyond. The mesmerizing eyes of the artist are here wide open. Thus, Picasso represents himself as a fixated visionary whose interior hallucination has imprinted itself rigidly on his own features. When I enter the studio, I leave my ego at the door the way the Muslims leave their shoes when they enter the mosque, and I only allow my spirit to go in there and paint, he would say years later. Perhaps the same is true of most, if not all, great artists, that they are at their most creative, their most individual when they're away from the center of the ego and engaging with the margins, the periphery, with a humility and an openness that take them along paths of uncertainty and instability, thus allowing the spirit to lead them in often new and unexpected ways. In another self-portrait from 1907, Picasso's wide eyes have grown even wider. Black pupils rimmed in black like Egyptian hieroglyphs. The rest of his features drawn schematically in a few slashing lines, as if he wished to reduce his face to a cipher, a sign as immediate but also as distant and inscrutable as something carved on the walls of an ancient temple, to quote Unger. Picasso abandoned for the moment the subtle push-pull of solid and void that had characterized the self-portraits of 1906 for an approach that is completely flat, almost calligraphic. Subtlety is banished in order to provide the most direct and mediated confrontation between the viewer and the image, as in a Byzantine icon. It suggests a man on the brink of a revelation. A still life he painted that same year looks like a clatter of objects stacked randomly on top of each other. A narrow human skull rests between a pile of books, a pipe, and an oddly shaped cup on a plate. Under these objects lies a bright pink cloth bunched up in sharp folds. Above them, the corner of a painting juts out from behind the pink cloth. This painting shows part of a figure on a blue background, a woman with her arm up over her head, rather like the women in a number of Picasso's paintings from this period. To the left of this painting is a palette with brushes fanning out from the thumb hole. The work is a memento mori for the Dusseldorf painter Karl-Heinz Wiegels, who hanged himself in the Bateau Lavoir, where both he and Picasso painted and lived on June 1st, 1908. It may, however, have been a more general tragic commemoration for artistic genius, in particular for Paul Cézanne, who had died in 1906, and for whom there were two important memorial exhibitions in Paris in 1907. It could be argued that through this painting, Picasso wanted to bring both artists back to life. The fingers of both of them, now dead, have been replaced by 5 lively brushes in the finger hole of his palette. The nude, although merely painted, turns towards the skull, which in turn seems to respond to her allure by pivoting to face her. Moving on to 1914, Picasso was impacted by yet another death. His companion, Eva Guel, had been consulting with a specialist, Dr. Rousseau, for what turned out to be lung cancer. She would undergo several procedures in February and also later in the spring. Faced with her increasingly debilitating health, Picasso exalted Eva's sexuality in one of the few portraits we have of her. Painted nude in her plush armchair, she is so crisply separated from the background by the encircling contour that she might be taken for a relief hanging on a wall, an effect comically enhanced by the fact that neither her feet nor the fringed base of the chair touched the ground. All in all, it is as if she had been reassembled from separate components by a process of cutting out, folding, bending, superimposing, and interlocking. There is an obvious parallel with the overlaps, superimpositions, and ambiguous positive-negative spaces of collages he had been executing since 1912. Flat and abstract areas, such as the woman's left thigh, contrast with illusionistic passages such as her embroidered petticoat. Yet Richardson has suggested that the whole arrangement is a covert portrayal of female genitalia. One even senses certain echoes of Jean-Auguste Dominique Ancre, pampered, silk-skinned odalisques posing for their lovers, their naked throats and arms framed by rumpled beds of lace. It was perhaps a symbolic mechanism intended to have Eva recover her full physical vigor. On December 9, 1915, Picasso wrote to his friend, the American writer Gertrude Stein, Don't be surprised if I've never written to you since you left, but my life is hell. Eva becomes more and more ill each day. I go to the hospital and then spend most of the time in the metro. However, I have made a picture of a harlequin that, to my way of thinking and to that of many others, is the best thing I have ever done. The tall picture he was referring to consists of broad, superimposed planes inclined at different angles, colored bright vermilion and ultramarine, and standing out against a black background. The rectangular body is made up of the typical diamond patterned costume, while the head is in the form of a stick with a black pommel. The gaiety of the coloring is all the more striking in that the construction is schematic in the extreme, and all signs of conventional reality have been excluded. This harlequin derives from a series of drawings and watercolors of two dancers, but in the end, all that is left of the girl is 2 or 3 layers of shadow, each on a highly skewed axis, onto which Harlequin's motley rocket of a body has been superimposed. Picasso's final bottle-top head is as dehumanized as a display fashion mannequin. The tiny toothy mouth is the more eerie for its rectus of a grin, and the eyes all the beadier for being minimal like bird-like. Harlequin's hands are hardly visible, minuscule paws, one white, another black, holding a white rectangle, a palette which has been left mysteriously blank, a variation on Veronica's veil. The unpainted area is unmistakably a self-portrait of Picasso in profile. The diamond patterned costume had once again triggered the artist's identification with his character, the Harlequin of medieval legend, a soul escaped from hell. He was once again playing the role of intercessor, bringing his companion back to life. Jumping to 1972, in June and July of that year, Picasso executed a series of self-portraits that directly addressed the artist's thematic focus on mortality and rebirth. Many of these compositions are simultaneously a self-portrait and a universal depiction of the human condition. Applying broad and gestural strokes of ink in an almost calligraphic manner, he highlighted with white gouache to accentuate the inky hues and playfully intensify the macabre associations with death. Dating from the final chapter in Picasso's prolific career, it offers a poignant commentary on what it means to be human, and is a testament to the driving creative impulse that regulated his life. Pierre Dex, who frequently visited Picasso during the summer of 1972, recalls, Picasso led me through his studios, and when we passed the one adjacent to the living room, which was left half in the dark as usual, he told me casually, I've made a drawing yesterday. I think that I have touched upon something. It is unlike anything I have ever done. When he unrolled it, I saw emerging the fixed and anguished look, the look of a Picasso as I have never seen it. He held the drawing side by side to his face, then put it back without saying anything. 3 months later, Picasso led him again to the self-portrait. I understood he wanted me to tell him what I felt. I told him that these were the colors of his still life Nature Mode of Ocran de Boeuf, after the death of his friend Julie Gonzalez. He heard it without wincing. Suddenly, I had a feeling that he had confronted death point blank. You can see the similarity in the colors with the canvas that I referred to. And in this case, the skull of a bull could be taken to be a crucified. And you can see the skull is almost humanized, and you can see the cross in red. In this trance-like stare, Picasso again looks like a shaman who has the ability of entering into non-ordinary reality or altered states of consciousness for the intentional purpose of bringing back life. The extraordinary travel into these non-ordinary realities is known as the shamanic journey, an ecstatic visionary method that is used by shamans to explore the hidden worlds of myth and dream. This shamanic state of consciousness can be used for awakening latent spiritual skills, as well as healing disease, disharmony and imbalances, which are the traumatic causes of illness and death. Through the intimate experience of substantial soul loss resulting from personal trauma, illness, or near death, what is called shaman's death, the shaman remembers how to track and retrieve a soul and facilitate its full recovery and reintegration into the whole self. Already in 1906, Reynal bore witness to Picasso's absolute shamanistic involvement in the creative act. He noted Picasso seemed so penetrated by what he was doing that he appeared physically incarnate in the subject he was painting. Armed sometimes with little stubs of brushes, he appeared to draw the lines out of the cards or the canvases as if with tweezers, and the whole drawing meekly followed his hand. It was as if he had it on a leash. The speed at which he realized even the most complicated compositions testified to his trance-like state, which was all the more unconscious in that he seemed himself to be discovering the new world his hand was creating. Breton later on would also attribute shamanistic powers to Picasso. Stationed at the society's periphery, the shaman has through eons of time served as intermediary between the community huddled around the fire and the unknown. Shamans still hold this position, but in the modern world, the nature of community and the unknown has changed. Yet, we still peer onto the darkness, searching for connections between ourselves and the outer side. In recent times, the practices of shamanism found fertile ground in artists like Picasso, who still felt the desire to reconnect with so much of what has been lost in our evolutionary sprint toward an ever less spiritual and natural world. Endemic to shamanic practice is the use of trance states. These allow the practitioner to move at will into the realms of spirits in order to communicate, learn, and negotiate, and develop lasting relationships with these beings. This set of practices exists in indigenous tribal cultures around the globe. In these traditional settings, a shaman is defined as one who enters into a trance state and interacts with spirits, either by journeying to where the spirits are or by bringing the spirits into their own body in order to bring information back to the ordinary realm and to facilitate change, most often concerning healing and the retrieval of information, which forms the practice of spiritual divination. Kurt Varnedoe, commenting on these last portraits of Picasso, wrote, "When Picasso looked in the mirror of that summer day in his 91st year, he was navigating in territory where few of us will ever go, and where little art has ever been produced. On the verge of an exploration from which no travelers return, he looked forward and left us before pushing on this final encryption in the ciphers of physical resemblance." Thank you.